Welcome first-time watchers, and welcome back if you're not. We got another crazy one. Before we jump in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you like the content on this channel, make sure you give this video a like and leave a comment. Now let's jump into it. Today, we got some weird dudes that kidnapped 26 children and 0 adult. On a Thursday morning, July 15, 1976, Frank Edward Ray, a 55-year-old school bus driver, was driving a bus filled with 26 children that went to Dairyland Elementary School, dropping them off at home. For Frank, this was just another day on the job, and the children had spent the day on a summer class trip to the Chowchilla Fairgrounds swimming pool. So it's safe to say they didn't expect any of the events that were about to occur. At approximately 4 p.m., a van drove into the bus's path and blocked the road. Ray stopped, and 3 Frederick Newhall Woods IV, James Schoenfeldman, Richard Schoenfeld, wearing nylon stockings covering their faces, exited the van and hijacked the school bus full of children. One of the men pointed a gun at Ray, a second drove the bus, and the third followed in the van. The 3 kidnappers drove to Berenda Slough, a shallow branch of the Chowchilla River, where they hid the bus so that no one would see it. They then retrieved a second van they had hidden nearby. Both vans had been modified by the kidnappers to transport their victims. The rear windows had been painted all black, and the interiors were insulated with soundproof paneling so that screaming couldn't be heard. Then, Frederick Woods and James and Richard Schoenfeld ordered Ray and the children into the vans at gunpoint, then drove them to the California Rock and Gravel Quarry in Livermore, roughly 110 miles from the fairgrounds. In the early morning hours of July 16th, the children and bus driver were forced, again at gunpoint, to climb down a ladder through a hatch and into a buried truck trailer. The kidnappers had made the trailer into an underground bunker with ventilation and a pit toilet, and stocked with several mattresses and a small amount of food and water. As the victims climbed from the van into the bunker, the kidnappers wrote the names and age of each child on a Jack-in-the-Box hamburger wrapper. Once the victims were all inside, the kidnappers took the ladder, covered the hatch with a heavy piece of sheet metal, weighted it with 2 100-pound industrial batteries, and buried the opening. After some hours had passed, Ray and the older children stacked the mattresses to reach the hatch. As Ray struggled to lift the hatch, 14-year-old Michael Marshall wedged a piece of wood into the opening, moved the sheet metal and batteries, and dug away the remainder of the debris covering the entrance. 16 hours after being imprisoned, Ray and the 26 children climbed out of the bunker and ran to the quarry guard's shack near Shadow Cliffs Regional Park. Alameda County sheriffs took the children and bus driver to Santa Rita Jail, the nearest facility with medical staff. Jail doctors and EMTs examined and treated them and gave them food and water, while the sheriffs took down statements and descriptions of the kidnappers. The children were then driven back to their families in Chowchilla. On July 16th, telephone lines to the Chowchilla Police Department were jammed with calls from media and frantic families. The kidnappers, therefore, were unable to issue their $5 million ransom demand, equivalent to $40.7 million in 2024. They decided to call back later and fell asleep. When they awoke later in the evening, they saw television news reports that the victims had freed themselves and were safe and sound at home. Meanwhile, the FBI had immediately begun investigating 24-year-old Frederick Newhall Woods IV, the son of Frederick Nickerson Woods III, owner of the California Rock and Gravel Quarry. The FBI discovered the younger Woods had keys to the quarry, unlimited access, and free use of its facilities. Additionally, Woods and two friends, brothers James and Richard Schoenfeld, aged 24 and 22, had been previously convicted of motor vehicle theft, for which they were sentenced to probation. The FBI obtained and executed a search warrant for Hawthorne, the 78-acre Woods estate in Portola Valley. In the younger Woods' room, investigators found journals, a draft of the ransom demand, maps, notes, plans, receipts for the vans and the trailer, false identification, one of the guns used in the kidnapping, and the hamburger wrapper on which were written the names and ages of each kidnapped child. The notes outlined plans to have the ransom money dropped from a plane into the Santa Cruz Mountains at night and retrieve it under cover of darkness. Also discovered was a rental contract for a storage facility. There, the FBI found the vans used to transport the children, as well as a getaway vehicle, a Cadillac spray-painted with flat black night camouflage. The FBI issued warrants for the arrest of Woods and the two Schoenfeld brothers. 8 days after the kidnapping, Richard Schoenfeld voluntarily surrendered to police. 2 weeks later, James Schoenfeld was arrested in Menlo Park. Later the same day, Woods was arrested by the RCMP in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. James Schoenfeld later said that even though he came from a wealthy family, both he and Woods were deeply in debt. We needed multiple victims to get multiple millions, and we picked children. Because children are precious, the state would be willing to pay ransom for them. And they don't fight back. They're vulnerable. They will mind. All jokes aside, lock me in the room with them, I'll kick their asses. All three pleaded guilty to kidnapping for ransom and robbery, but refused to enter a guilty plea to infliction of bodily harm. As a conviction on that count, in conjunction with the kidnapping charge, carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. They were tried on the bodily harm charge, found guilty, and given the mandatory sentence, but their convictions were overturned by an appellate court, which found that physical injuries sustained by the children, mostly cuts and bruises, did not meet the standard for bodily harm under the law, and they were sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Richard Schoenfeld was released in 2012, and James Schoenfeld was paroled on August 7, 2015. In 2016, a workers' compensation lawsuit filed against Woods revealed that he had been running several businesses, including a gold mine and a car dealership, while being in prison without notifying prison authorities. The heir to two wealthy California families, the Newhalls and the Woods, he inherited a trust fund from his parents that was described in one court filing as being worth $100 million, equivalent to $500 million in 2024, although Woods' lawyer disputed that amount. In October 2019, Woods was denied parole again. This made the 19th time. Over the years, reasons given for the denials included his continued minimization of the crime, as well as disciplinary infractions for possession of contraband pornography and cell phones. Woods married 3 times while in prison and purchased a mansion about half an hour away from the prison. Around March 2022, a panel of 2 commissioners recommended Woods for parole. The recommendation required the approval of the full parole board, the board's legal division, and California's governor. Governor Gavin Newsom asked the board to reconsider, but the decision was affirmed. August 17, 2022, it was reported that Woods' parole had been granted and he was soon to be released from prison. The bus driver, Ray, received a California School Employees Association citation for outstanding community service. The poor man died May 17, 2012. He was visited by many of the school children he had helped save. In 2015, Chowchilla renamed the Sports and Leisure Park as the Edward Ray Park and declared every February 26, Ray's birth date, Edward Ray Day. A study found that the 26 children suffered from panic attacks, nightmares involving kidnappings and death, and personality changes. Many developed fears of such things as cars, the dark, the wind, the kitchen, mice, dogs, and as funny as it may sound, hippies. And one shot a Japanese tourist with a BB gun when the tourist's car broke down in front of his home. See, it's a good thing this was the 70s and not nowadays, because that poor guy would have got hit with a switch 1,000 times. Many of the children continued to report symptoms of trauma at least 25 years after the kidnapping, including substance abuse and depression, and a number have been imprisoned for doing something controlling to somebody else. The care of young victims of trauma has been guided by what was learned about the effects of the Chowchilla kidnapping on the 26 children who were abducted. In 2016, the 25 surviving victims settled a lawsuit they had filed against their kidnappers. The money they received was paid out of Frederick Wood's trust fund, and although the exact settlement amount was not disclosed to the public, one survivor stated that they had each received enough to pay for some serious therapy, but not enough for a house. Do y'all think therapy helped them? Friedrich Newhall, Woods IV, aged 24 during the kidnapping, was repeatedly denied parole until August 2022, when at the age of 70, he was finally granted full parole. James Schoenfeld, aged 24 during the kidnapping, was paroled in 2015 at the age of 63. Richard Schoenfeld, age 22 during the kidnapping, was paroled in 2012 at age 57. Do y'all think that these guys should have been released? Man, could you imagine these kids being yours? Well, that's going to do it. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. See you in the next one.